Sex outside marriage, right or wrong? With Indonesia's declaration of a new criminal code penalizing premarital sex or sex out of wedlock set to be legitimized by its parliament. Yet again, humanity is faced with the eternal question of the century, to be or not to be. While prominent Indonesian activists believe it's an impingement of civil rights, country-based Islamic outfits believe that if passed, this will be a landmark judgment passed in the history of Indonesia, as it has been consistently trying to decolonize itself from the Dutch culture. This resistance to Western culture is not new for Indonesia. In 1966, Sukarno, the first president of Indonesia, brought a new order, which was an attempt to bring a political and cultural change. He believed Western-style democracy was inappropriate for the Indonesian way of life. While politically Indonesia is known to be a secular country, the code, if passed, could have serious ramifications for that image. After a globally successful presidency over the G20 summit held this year in Bali, a more global and contemporary outlook is what was expected. But with the code set to ban and penalize cohabitation without marriage, premarital sex or sex out of wedlock, how open will the world be to Indonesia? Pertinent questions pertaining to economic investments also arise automatically post this legislative change in the Southeast Asia's largest economy. While Indonesia attracts big foreign investments from Japan, the US, Singapore and Hong Kong, with the holiday season nearing, how many international tourists would still like to make warm Christmas and New Year plans for Bali? Indonesia's hospitality sector could be well heading into even tougher times, especially in the post-pandemic era. Australia has already released a list of prohibitions for its citizens set by the Indonesian government to be put in place anytime next week. The concern is genuine, as any disobedience could lead to a one-year jail term. Apart from this, Indonesia is also known for banning same-sex relationships and even prohibits abortion, disobedience of which could lead to a jail term of up to 4 years. A previous draft of the code was set to be passed in 2019, but it sparked nationwide protests led by students and activists back then. With the anticipation of similar protests now, Indonesia's parliament has reintroduced attacking dignity and honor of the president as a punishable offence too. This announcement is leading to unease in Western countries. The Deputy Justice Minister of Indonesia, Edward Omar Sharif, says the new code will not threaten democratic freedoms, but many are questioning the intrusion into private lives through public policy. For more on this story, we are now joined by author and commentator Andreas Harsono. He joins us from Jakarta. Thanks very much for speaking to WION. Now, the question simply is, isn't this criminal code completely draconian and out of place in a modern society? This is like entering somebody's bedroom and policing their personal private lives.
That is true. I cannot imagine the damages that this draft will create in Indonesia if the parliament is to pass this draft law. It is going to be a dark era for Indonesia. The current criminal code was passed in 1918, meaning that more than a century. I bet that if this draft is to be passed, it might take another century to make a major amendment. This is going to be disastrous for human rights in Indonesia, for women, for religious minorities, for LGBT individuals. This is going to be disastrous.
You think it is going to be disastrous. Now, let's not forget, Indonesia relies on tourism in a big way. Bali is a major tourist destination. But this code, we are given to understand, will apply to foreign visitors as well. Will it not make tourists wary of visiting the country?
Oh, yes. But we need to differentiate between Hindu majority provinces like Bali. They can choose not to enforce the criminal code. So thus, it might not affect Bali because the local government will not enforce it. They can do that if they want to. And also, Eastern Indonesia, where there are Christian majority, they might not enforce this draconian law. It will only be enforced in Muslim conservative provinces, mostly in Indonesia.
Okay, so regions like Bali in the end may not be impacted. We'll have to wait and see what the local governments decide to do. But I will go back to the question that I started this conversation with, because it's the most fundamental question to this entire discussion. What business do public officials or governments have to interfere in the private lives of citizens under the garb of upholding the country's values?
Exactly, that is the problem. Because if this law is to be passed and to be enforced, how many prison buildings and how many millions of couples will be arrested and sent to prison? I cannot imagine that. Unfortunately, many lawmakers and also many government officials, including that particular deputy minister, and what he writes, they might not think that way. They think that they understand the so-called values of this country. This is going to be a big disaster. This is going to send back Indonesia to medieval time.
Absolutely, this legislation does sound like it could spell absolute disaster for the citizens of Indonesia. Let's certainly hope that the government and parliament decide to have a rethink. Thanks so much for speaking to WION.